The monster behind the door was not the 18-year-old with the gun. It was the gun. A new report by the Texas Tribune shows that officers responding to the mass murder at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, did not confront the murderer for 77 minutes because they were afraid of his weapon. Police knew the monster behind the door was not the kid. It's the rifle the kid is holding. That's what Jesse Rizzo said. His 9-year-old niece, Jackie Cazares, was murdered in school that day. The murderer had an AR-15, which was designed as a weapon of war and was first used widely by American soldiers in the Vietnam War in the 1960s. You know what kind of gun? State Trooper Richard Bogdansky asked in a conversation captured on his body camera footage outside the school. AR. He has a battle rifle, a voice responded. Does he really? Another asked. What's the safest way to do this? I'm not trying to get clapped out, Bogdansky said. He has a battle rifle. And so there's a Texas state trooper wanting to know what's the safest way to deal with a mass murderer in a school who has an AR-15. And he wants to know the safest way because he says, I'm not trying to get killed here. And the answer is, of course, there is no safe way. The weapon is designed to kill anyone in the line of fire, even if they're standing on the other side of a wall. In a 1962 Defense Department analysis of the weapon for use by the United States Army, it said that the weapon has, quote, excellent killing or stopping power. That same Defense Department report included a description of what happened when the AR-15, then called an M16, was used in combat in Vietnam at a distance of 50 yards. Quote, one man was shot in the head. It looked like it exploded. A second man was hit in the chest. His back was one big hole. That's because the bullet from an AR-15 creates an ever-expanding cavity wound as it passes through the body. The entrance wound from an AR-15 is always much smaller than the exit wound. And every one of those terrified Texas police officers who showed up at that elementary school knew that about the AR-15. In an interview, one of those officers said, the way he was shooting, he was probably going to take all of us out. None of those officers were embarrassed by how afraid they were. And they shouldn't be. Some of them are no doubt embarrassed by the failure to act despite their fear. But the fear itself is nothing to be ashamed of. There is no other rational feeling to have in the presence of a loaded AR-15. The radio traffic that day was filled with that police fear. I have a male subject with an AR, Coronado said. The dispatch crackled on the radio of another officer on the opposite side of the building. Well, I can't say what he said. Heck, that officer said. AR, another exclaimed, alerting others nearby. In one of the interviews by investigating authorities after the shooting, Uvalde Police Department Detective Louis Landry said, we weren't equipped to make entry into that room without several casualties. Once we found out it was a rifle he was using, it was a different game plan we would have to had come up with. It wasn't just going in guns blazing Old West style and take him out. But that is exactly what happened in the end. That is exactly how he was taken out in the end. And there were no police casualties. Zero. 21 people were murdered in that elementary school that day. Children, teachers. 18 of them were pronounced dead at the school. Some of the officers on the scene were armed with AR-15s, just like the murderer. And they were afraid to go against an AR-15 with an AR-15. And that was a reasonable fear. Everyone in that fourth grade classroom was afraid too. Some of the 19 children and 2 teachers who were killed bled to death slowly, and they were afraid for every second that they were still alive. Kids pretending to be dead were terrified for every second of those 77 minutes that 400 heavily armed police officers waited because they were afraid of the AR-15 in that classroom. When Joe Biden was a senator, he led the United States Senate in banning AR-15s in 1994. That ban expired 10 years later when the Republican-controlled Congress and Republican President George W. Bush willfully decided to not renew the ban on assault weapons. Every use of an AR-15 in a school in America since then is the fault of President George W. Bush and the Republican Congress, who made sure that on their watch, America's mass murderers were going to be the very best equipped mass murderers in the world. An AR-15 had never been used in a mass murder until 2007, during the presidency of George W. Bush. Last year, the AR-15 was used in 67% of American mass murders. George W. Bush and Republican government did that. It takes 60 votes in the United States Senate to pass a ban on assault weapons, and no Republican will vote for that ban. And so the AR-15 will continue to be the favorite weapon of America's mass murderers. In the early days of the FBI in the 1920s, when they became increasingly aware that they could not effectively confront the famous machine gun wielding gangsters of that era, they asked Congress to outlaw machine guns, which is exactly what the Congress did in 1934. The ban on machine guns passed the United States Senate unanimously. Every Democrat, every Republican in the Senate voted to ban machine guns. The senators from Texas voted to ban machine guns. Texas has very different senators now. Senator Bob Hall is a Republican member of the Texas State Senate. He said this about the 18-year-old mass murderer who shot 21 people to death in that fourth grade classroom in Uvalde. Quote, "This man had enough time to do it with his hands or a baseball bat, and so it's not the gun, it's the person." They will say anything with his hands. Senator Bob Hall believes that he can walk into a fourth grade classroom and murder 2 teachers and 19 children with his hands, while they all presumably sit around waiting for him to get to them so that he can murder them. Senator Bob Hall thinks that he can walk into a fourth grade classroom in Texas and murder 2 teachers with a baseball bat and then murder 19 children with a baseball bat. Senator Bob Hall believes that no one would be able to run away while he was trying to do that. The 2 teachers would actually have a pretty good chance of stopping the bad guy with the baseball bat while the 19 children were running away. It would have been much cheaper for the United States Army to use baseball bats during the Vietnam War, but for some reason, beyond Senator Bob Hall's comprehension apparently, the Army decided to spend the money and send the soldiers and Marines to Vietnam with M16s so they could kill as many people as possible in seconds. And now the civilian version of that weapon, the AR-15, has come home to do in fourth grade classrooms what it was designed to do in war. And American police officers now live in fear of that weapon, just like the Vietnamese soldiers who were the first to be killed by that weapon. 90 years ago, America knew how to solve a problem like this and ban machine guns. Sanity still prevailed in those days.